I was wondering, is it out of place for us to rise up and just do the second stanza of the national anthem?
No.
Okay, I'd like us to just
We all know it.
I will lead. I have a very terrible voice, so I'm wanting that. Okay, but will happen one way or the other. Okay. O God of creation, direct and open cause, guide our leaders right, help our youth the truth to know, in love and honesty to grow and live in just and true. Great lofty heights attain to build a nation where peace and justice shall reign. Thank you very much. Thank you.
It chose a difficult one.
Thank you very much. So I'm just going to start by briefly introducing Madam Oby Ezekwesili, who we fondly refer to as MP, meaning Madam President. We're speaking prophetically, so amen? Amen. Okay, thank you very much. So, I want to start with a personal story. So the first time I met Madam Oby Ezekwesili was when I was 12. And what I had done was I had written a letter when I was in GSS 3 to the existing Minister of Education at the time, who was Madam Oby Ezekwesili, asking her to come to our school because we were organizing a policy forum. What did I know, right? And I wrote the letter because we used to write letters on Sundays at Loyola Jesuit College in Abuja. And lo and behold, we got a response. My principal, first of all, held it because it came in a Ministry of Education thing. So he thought maybe they were sanctioning the school for something or the other. And he was very surprised and thought maybe she just sent that response to hold us. But lo and behold, on said day came and she showed up. For the first time. Yeah, I know. When you showed up to speak to all of us, we kept her waiting for 30 minutes. She came on time. And I think for me, it really exemplified for me at 12 years old the kind of leader that she is. And, since that episode, I think we've gone on to have an amazing relationship. But I want to shift away gears.
But guy, I didn't know you were the child.
I was the child that wrote you that letter on Sunday. For the first time, yes. Yeah. She's probably not heard it before. But I also want to talk about, a little bit about, what we're trying to do. And then I will hand over to her because she does a far better job of talking about what we're trying to do than anybody else. As we all know, right, we live in an interesting country. For lack of a better word, I don't want to confess negative. We all personally successful, but the one dent on our personal success or a stain is the state of the country where we come from and where it is. And it is a sign that the best of us, despite the numbers, are not the ones who are in charge or in control. And what it is that Madam Oby Ezekwesili's running represents is the first time that you have somebody as a presidential candidate you don't have to manage, you don't have to hold your nose to vote for or support, you don't have to worry about whether they will be surrounded by the right people. And as a great man once said, Chibok said, the problem with Nigeria, which is something I'm sure we all discuss over and over again, is fairly and squarely a failure of what? Leadership. And so what we're trying to do is to disrupt politics, as Madam President likes to say, so that we can have for the first time a candidate that represents the people, not the political class. And so it's on this note that I want to introduce to us, to a rousing welcome, Madam Oby Ezekwesili, the presidential candidate of the Allied Congress Progressive Party.
Okay, thank you so much, Iyi. Thank you, Bosun. Thank you to Bumi, all of you that had a hand in getting me out here to Leicester. And I was saying to Iyi that I saw some people who were saying, is it possible, really, that Oby Ezekwesili might be planning to do a Leicester on us in Nigerian presidential run? I didn't understand.
Oh.
Yes. Initially, I didn't understand it. Then I remembered and said, okay, they're saying I'm going to come as an underdog Leicester and defeat some... you know. So I said it is therefore very providential that I am visiting Leicester. Of all the suburbs of London that I could have gone to, I came to Leicester. They better get ready. They better get ready. You know. But thank you very much for inviting me and making all of these plans. And thank you so much, Iyi. Iyi, you never told me you were that 12-year-old child that wrote me. You know, it's amazing. I get to hear these stories, you know, often of that era when I was Minister of Education. Every time I saw a letter from a young person, there was something that it did to me. It made me feel like, wow, there's a consciousness on the part of these children reminding me of how I used to be. That's why I always responded. I never let anything go when I was growing up. So I tell the story of how at the age of 10 I woke up and I said to my mom and dad, my 10th birthday, I said, Mom, Dad, sit down, we have a meeting. I'm calling you to a meeting. You know, my mom rolled her eyes, calling us to a meeting. Meeting for what? My dad said, Madam, sit down, she needs a meeting. You know, so they sat down. And I said, I just want to announce that I am 10 years today. And that because I am now 10 years, I have become an adult. I don't want anybody to talk to me anyhow again in this house. And that from this day, I'm going to take absolute charge of the house. I'll do everything that I'm supposed to do, but nobody should talk to me anyhow because I'll be very responsible. You know, my mom tells the story these days that actually she watched me go from being 10 to being like age 30 or something like that, because as I said it, I did do what I told them I was going to do. So when I saw people like you, there was also this young woman on Twitter. She goes by Duchess, or what's yeah, that's what she calls herself. I'm trying to remember her first name, but I just lost her first name and her last name. Oh, she's an Omu child or something like that. But her younger brother did the same thing. He had written, you know, when I was Minister of Education, to report a teacher who did not give him the score that he was entitled to on something. And I replied and said, and told him that that teacher was wrong to have done that. So one day the young man, you know, put out that he had done that when he was in primary, in secondary, was it primary or secondary school? And some of the people doubted him, that, oh, he was trying to suck up. Because I remembered when he said he wrote something, and what he said he wrote, I remembered it, but I couldn't contextualize. So when they started doubting him, he now said he was traveling, but that when he would go home, he would find the letter and my response, and he would put it up. And he did. You know? So for me, governance and leadership has never been, it's never been artificial. It's really been about connecting with the people that you lead for. You know, governance is supposed to deliver results. Governance comes with responsibility, and it requires accountability, because every responsibility has got an audience that you are responsible for. And so my story in governance is a very long one. We don't have much time, so I'm going to skip a lot of it. But suffice it to say that my agitation, my state of pain concerning our country is not something that started today. As that young child, I used to really be very prodigious in engaging my dad, and my dad loved me to death anyway. So I was his sparring partner in terms of listening to the news, reading newspapers, reading magazines. As a very young child, he would give me The Economist, I would be reading it, and I would be, trying to understand the concepts and talking them, So I was that kind of a child. And so I would ask this question: why is my environment so poor? Why is it not like the one I'm seeing on television? As a curious child, I would ask, why is this like that? And my dad would say things like, it's because of failure of leadership. We have poor governance. And I would try to understand what having poor governance was. And he would explain to me. And, one of the days as he explained to me, I said to him, when I grow up, I'm going to fix it. I was that kind of a child. My dad threw me up in the air. I bounced up, shrieked with laughter, was excited that he actually thought I was going to fix poor governance when I grew up. So I had this thing. It was there. It was there. And it followed me all through my secondary school days. I told some people, I don't know whether it was yesterday or so, how it was when I went to Enugu. I told them, I said, if there was a time, I don't know, I don't see anybody who is about my age, maybe slightly, yeah, you're about my age. What do you know is my age? You might know because I'm very public about my age. I was born April 28, 1963, so, just about the same. You serious? You've done a better job of being young. So I told the story of how during our own time in secondary school, we woke up one day and the military decided that children in Nigeria had become undisciplined and they were going to send military personnel to our schools to discipline us. So all schools suddenly received one captain or major that appeared in our school and became part of the staff. And their business was to cane children into... Oh, you guys are hearing this story for the first time. Oh my goodness, I have to write something about this. And that was part of why when I went to Ministry of Education, I brought back history as part of our curriculum change. As soon as I left, they yanked the thing off, But the history needs to be written properly so that people can follow. Because our own captain was called Captain Obimbe. And Captain Obimbe took delight in holding his koboko. When you passed him, it didn't matter whether you did anything wrong or you didn't do anything wrong, Captain Obimbe would just use that koboko on you. Yes. And it got to the point where I was not happy at all about it. For some reason, he never did. The koboko never landed on me. But I watched this thing happening. One day when he gave it again to one of my friends, I just walked up to him and said, "Don't you ever use this koboko on anybody." Ooh, all my schoolmates were like, "Oh dear Lord." They knew me as catering. So Kate has done it again. What is she doing? Captain Obimbe will roast her today. And he said, "Who are you talking to?" I said, "It's you, Captain Obimbe. You should not cane people for nothing." I said, if people did something wrong and you cane them, that's understandable. But if people don't do something wrong and you just cane them anyhow, you're confusing all of us. And my classmates had gathered. The next thing, I think the news got to the staff room. My principal ran out, teachers ran out, and they just watched me and this captain. And the captain was transfixed, just looking at me and sort of having this koboko, but not using it on me. And then he said, "Oh yeah, go to your classroom." I said, "No, I won't go until you tell me that you will not cane people anyhow again." And And at that point, Captain Obembe was told by my principal, please don't be annoyed. So my principal was there trying to make sure that this girl did not create trouble for him. But the man that I was addressing sort of could not, he couldn't punish me. Something that I was saying meant something to him. It was the last time Captain Obembe just used his koboko anyhow. So I learned something. My schoolmates learned something. If we had not challenged Captain Obembe, he would have continued to use the koboko, whether we liked it or not, whether we did wrong or did right, it didn't matter. It was confusing us. Bad behavior, end you koboko. Good behavior, end you koboko. What's the incentive for good behavior? Zero. Right? So you can see from my life, because I then went on to university, I was known in university for being the one that if something was not right in the cafeteria, I wouldn't even do let us go and carry placard. I would go and look for the administrator and just question why that was so. By the way, for those of you that love football, well, sometimes when I talk about football, some people would say, how do you know that? Well, I used to suffer that when I was an undergrad. Because, at the cafeteria, they would have this billboard that showed the score lines, right? So you would have played, goal for, goal against, won, drew, and all of that. And I would be there, trying to look at the various houses on campus. And the boys on campus would say, what are you even doing here? What do you know you're reading? One day they challenged me to tell them what all those acronyms stood for. And by the time I finished reciting it, they started singing for me. You don't win. You don't win. So I'm not your usual kind of, person. I'm just not I just do the things that I do on the basis of the drive that I have. And university, graduated, did youth service, did masters, then did my first, I begged to apply, and only I begged to apply I ever then did in my life following that. Because subsequently, all my other things that I did were born out of assignment, and I was always headhunted for them. By the time I did my, I became a professional working in Deloitte and Touche, because that was the only job that I ever applied for, once saying I begged to apply. I then qualified as a chartered accountant. Upon qualifying as a chartered accountant and then going into the financial services sector, I was well known for, my maturity had come really by then as a professional. So I was writing about governance issues. And then I had the fortune of becoming one of the young people invited by the Africa Leadership Forum, as a think tank was taking foothold, and it was bringing in young people, professionals like me from African countries. And at the Leadership Forum, you would learn a lot of things. And, and I was writing an op-ed about governance issues. At the end of the day, I became one of the co-founders of Transparency International at that time. And also it coincided with the time of militarization, the tail end of it, because the then president Babangida had been forced by citizens' agitation to do an election. After that election, decided to annul it. And that brought an awakening on the part of professionals like never before seen in Nigeria. Because the likes of Atedo Peter's side, Patu Tommy, Samoni, Maureen Babalola, Ayo Igodaru, Aswe Igodalo, there was the different parts of us. Waziri, who was chairman, best known as chairman of Railway that died in that air crash. Yes, you know, so we were the concerned professionals, people like you who were doing so well with their lives, never paid attention to issues of governance. At least in my own case, I had a history of doing that. But a lot of what concerned professionals was really about people who hitherto at that time, prior to that time, didn't take any interest, didn't want to say any word about you know, issues of poor governance or corruption or demand for accountability, but suddenly saying, how can you annul an election that was free and fair? How? And so it became a movement of professionals. And we would go out on the street to demonstrate and say the election needed to be restored, the results needed to be fully called, and that his mandate needed to be restored. That agitation was quite something. We got beaten on the streets. You know, like when professionals were all, in those days, you call professionals young, upwardly mobile. You know, that's what we used to be. Yuppies. You people don't know that kind of language now. That is very old and dated. But that's our own slang for our generation, yuppies. You know? So they beat. I said to the young people, I said, you think you know SARS? Our own time it was called kill and go. It was mobile police. They would roll the tank and it would be something else. So I'm saying all of this in order to show you how far back the issue of poor governance has been at the center of the things that have mattered to me. And, you know, fast forward, I had ended up in having to go to Germany as the government became even more terrible. One of the days that Mrs. Kudirat Abiola had to go to court concerning her husband's mandate, we used to, you know, just go also as concerned professionals to be there to support. And on one of those days, she was going to court. I was on my way to the Igboshore High Court, and you know, the then acting High Commissioner of Canada called me, Joel Olsen, and said, "Oby, where are you?" And I said, "I'm on my way to the court," because I mean he knew we were going to be. He said, "Okay, maybe you want to be going home." And I said, "Why?" He said, "They've just shot Kudirat Abiola and she's dead." What? Was a new one ever in Nigeria. I mean, like, they have done a lot of things, you know, but to kill a woman on the streets of Lagos was a different level. Entirely different level. Oh, my mom went ballistics because she had just lost her husband some months. And she was like, no. It had become terrible. I mean, it had gone to a new dimension. And then, you know, most of the people in the concerned professionals began to say, you know, maybe we should, you know, professionals. So much to lose. Maybe, you know, maybe. And
should be more professional.
Yeah. So, you know, our numbers just dwindled following that. And then the next thing was, you know, Transparency International said, you have to, and then the, you know, President Obasanjo was one of the co-founders, and he was chairman of the advisory board. I was one of the co-founders and pioneer members of the board, of the global board. And so they first picked him and put him away in jail, and you know, for for planning a coup, that phantom, you know, accusation of a coup. And then the Transparency International could see, because I still was bouncing around the place, telling the government how we were going to find all the money they were stealing, and we were going to, you know, have a case, so it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy because TI said, we don't want to lose we don't want to lose you. We need you to actually be a voice for the kind of international action that is necessary to get your country out of the grips of dictatorship. So I had to go to Berlin. And going to Berlin was one of the toughest things that I had to do as a wife, as a mother, as a daughter. But then we had to do Berlin. And then from Berlin to I stayed briefly in the UK also, and then ended up in the US, where I then went to Harvard University, and then began to work with Professor Jeffrey Sachs, and kept saying that our country would turn around, as I became the mouthpiece of, the advocacy, especially as it concerned the poor governance, lack of transparency aspect of militarization. We ended up, through the providence of God, getting our democracy back 1999. It wasn't until end of 2000 that I had to go home. And why did I go home? Because we had been doing some work at the Kennedy School, Professor Sachs and myself. He became so excited about Nigeria because of he called it my contagious optimism about my country, that even when we were going through that terrible period, I kept telling him, we're going to be fine, we will be fine. And he would say, your country is a basket case. And I would say, just wait and see what will happen in my country. So he said, a brutal dictator is in charge of your country, Oby. Why don't you just get real? I said, just wait and see what will happen. I had no idea, but I knew that I'm a strong woman of faith. And I was just declaring that it would be fine. And one day, it was fine. We got democracy. So he now felt obliged to help in our democracy. So with his contacts with President Clinton at that time, we then began to do a debt sustainability analysis at Harvard, at the Center for International Development, to show that we were doing it to show that Nigeria's democracy would not be sustainable if the world did not help Nigeria to address the shrunk state of the fiscal possibilities of Nigeria. Nigeria was spending about 7 times what is spent on health, or what is spent on health to service the debt. About 8 times what is spent on education to service the debt. It was not a sustainable prospect. And so that caught the attention and imagination of President Clinton, but the Congress as well as the Treasury were not persuaded. They wouldn't go with him. And so we didn't make progress with that. So we then said, what could persuade concerning Nigeria? Because if a leading country as an creditor like the US, just puts an X on such a prospect, all the other countries will fall in line with it. That's the way the global community works. So we said we needed to find some evidence to track something that has changed, so that, because what the Treasury and Congress said was that, it amounts to moral hazard to give a debt reduction to a country that uses its own resources badly, because it's basically rewarding bad behavior. So we needed to find evidence. That was what took me home. That evidence to do the kind of reform that will enable us to track evidence that Nigeria has started using its resources better, was what took me home to go and do the reform of the public procurement system.
Due process. Do
you understand that? It was a journey home to do that particular work. As part of, I became by then I had been announced as the director of the Nigeria Harvard Economic Strategy Program. It was on the basis of that I went to be there for 18 months. I ended up being there for 6.5 years, because you know, we by the time we did the due process work and then worked on the act, the Public Procurement Act and the bureau that is a birth, and then had to do the Nigeria Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, NAITI, then solid minerals, and then education. And in all of those assignments, the consistency that you would see is basically that the heart of it was good governance. Good governance was the heart of it. Every aspect of it was toward good governance. And that defined my work. And so by the time I left government because I was headhunted by the then president of the World Bank, Wolfowitz, who wanted a very strong candidate that would compete in the internal and external. I didn't want to go to the World Bank process. I used to hire the World President for not caring to focus on transparency, accountability, and anti-corruption issues. But I was persuaded to do that recruitment process. And after the process, he said, there's no other candidate I want than you. It took a lot for me to eventually be persuaded to agree to go. And then we went, responsible for 48 countries on the continent, and decided that the continent needed to understand the concept of good economic governance. If it understood it, it would have the right economic policies, sound policies, macroeconomic policies that would ensure stability, macroeconomic stability, focus on structural reforms, do sectoral and institutional reforms, get the institutions dynamic and working anchored on the rule of law, invest in critical infrastructure and building of world-class human capital. It would set the stage for growth. And by the way, we actually saw it happen in some of the countries. Paul Kagame would always tell anybody that cares to listen that a lot of what happened in Rwanda, he gives credit to the fact that he has a certain sister called Oby. Wow. It's happened in a number of the other countries. I mean, the president of Malawi or the president of Liberia or that of Guinea-Conakry. So I was responsible for 48 countries on the continent. Together with our team in the Africa region, we actually did push economic reforms across the continent. And because of that push, you know, the economists had called us the basket case that would never be mended. And then as Africa started growing, as Africa started doing okay, and growth began to move toward an average of 4 to 5%, the highest in many decades, the same economist, my boss, Zolik, who took over from Wolfowitz, at the time that I was leaving the bank, said, if there's any testimony to the work that you and your team did, it is that the same economist now recanted and said, whatever you thought of Africa, think again. We thought it was a hopeless continent, but this is a trajectory of growth because we were hands-on. I say all of this in order for you to understand that I am not that person who does these issues concerning governance on the basis of, oh, I want to be heard, and so that my voice will be known, oh, for relevance, oh, I have nothing doing, so I have to make noise. All of that is the noise of the marketplace. Doesn't define me. This is a consistent commitment to the idea that our continent, our country, has no business being laggards in development. We have no business being laggards. There's no rocket science to development. Countries have gone within 5 decades from poverty to upper income economies. We've seen it happen. We now know that it happens. So what is it about us that has damned us to the dismal results that we have had in governance? And when I was in government, I modeled that belief, what do you call it? That sense of that conviction that it could be done. That's why, no matter how difficult the reforms were, one had to push forward with teams to do the reforms. And when people say, oh, what is it even in government that makes people not to succeed when they go there? I say, no, don't put it like that. It depends on what is driving you. All kinds of resistance were put on my part. I told the story of how, in those days they would try to frustrate what we were doing with the public procurement reform, with the due process. First, they started calling me Madam Due Process, some of it out of mockery, some of it out of the ones who called me Madam Due Process out of, a commendation for the work where I knew them. The ones who called me just as out of mockery because they knew I didn't like to be called Madam Due Process. I also knew them. So I was telling the story of how the National Assembly would want to wear me out. So every day one committee or the other would invite me to come and explain what was obvious. Ministries used to just package contracts for themselves and for the boys. But with the due process system, it was impossible to do so. And so we had technical team. It was a structured process. It was, I normally explain it to people that we so structured the way of the review. Every contract that was above a certain threshold needed to have almost an 18-page report of the evaluation of the process to see how it satisfied international competitive bid standard of requirement of transparency, competitiveness, fairness, and cost competitiveness. So it was a very sound work, but they wanted to wear me out. And one of the days I realized what the whole aim was, because they invited me to this committee, the finance and this thing and economic committee at that time. And it was myself and Adamushioma, who was the Minister of Finance there. We were such a lovely man. He would say to me, you don't know how much work you're doing. I'm so proud of the work. They were trying to create confusion. They would say to him, oh, she shouldn't really be doing, this is a finance function. It should be in the Ministry of Finance. And he says to them, I don't need it in the Ministry of Finance. I like it where it is, and I like the work she's doing. So you get allies in government and you're good. He was an ally. So they invited us, and by the time they were telling us why, they asked me to explain why the budget should not be more, the capital budget should not be more, that because they want to take 1 billion at that time, the total national reserve, the foreign reserve of the country was, I think, less than $6 billion, and they wanted to take 1 billion out of it. I said, what are you taking? It's already been monetized. So there is it's not a savings. That reserve that you're thinking of taking, basic economics is important for all political leaders in our country. That we must do. When I get elected, everybody will go through Economics 101 in the country. Because we need to be on the same wavelength, really, Because they saw 5 billion and decided if we just take 1 billion from it and we'll just increase the capital budget. And I said, you're just going to be printing money. That money has already been spoken for. Yes, it's been fiscalized. And you've already spent it. So you want to do a double dip, that's going to ruin the economy. And after I explained, the chairman just sat down, adjusted his agbada, and said to me, Madam Due Process, when are you going back to Harvard? That was his response. It was like, when are you going back to where you came from? You see, that mindset is the mindset of our failure. Failure of all of you and I. We failed because we gave a bunch of fellows who do not even understand certain concepts the sense of entitlement that governance belongs to them. That's why when some people, like someone like me, I come out for politics, you would see somebody who has no business to even insult you. He would say, what do you know about politics? You think that politics is speaking grammar. Why do you think they say that? They believe that they are the ones entitled to politics, that you and I are supposed to be somewhere speaking grammar. And why is that so? Because we did it to ourselves. It was Plato that said that every of us who thinks that politics is beneath us will be governed by our inferiors. That's the story of our country and the story of Africa. Because I saw it. Technical people like myself and my colleagues that were in government during that era, that were known as the economic team of the president, we did all that technical work. As we were working, some of them would just be doing like this. Let them finish. One of them told me that they normally have this discussion where they're saying, let her be saving all that money. By the time they go, we shall show them how to spend money. Politics was disconnected from the governance measures that we technically were taking. So one of the deputy speakers of the country saw me one day. He came to the villa and he said, we got talking, hello, and then we got talking. And then he said to me, Madam Due Process, I like all these reforms you people are doing. I like it. But what I need to ask you is why now? Did you get it? Why now meant, why should it be during my own time that you're doing all these your reforms? They didn't like the due process, they didn't like monetization, they didn't like anything that stood in the way of making wealth out of governance. And so for me, that did not change. Because as soon as that crop left the government, a lot of the reforms that were done, the next political season, this, sort of unraveled them, rolled back on them. And then this rolling back on the reforms is something that we now see is connected to the politics of Africa. It's not only in Nigeria, it's in many other countries on the continent that the rollback on reforms happen as soon as political actors change. So why is it that way? Why it is that way is that we can learn from a country like Singapore. The consistency of Singapore was not only in the fact of the long tenure that Lee Kuan Yew, it was that Lee Kuan Yew turned his technical people to the politicians. So you are technical. I know the Deputy Prime Minister of Singapore, Tharman, is a friend of mine. Now, Tharman, by the time he was a technical person just growing within the technical stream, the next thing they picked up stars like him and made them run for parliamentary office. They became parliamentarians, they became party chieftains, and still with their skills. So that the politics and the technical work came together. In our own case, the technical work goes off on its own. The politicians fight the technical work. This dominant mindset that actually you being appointed to do work in government is a reward or something like you're going to enjoy. So it was there even then. Because you would see people who would say to us, the time when we were dancing and doing all the things for campaign, where were you? I'm like, okay, I wasn't dancing with you. I came home to fix something. I didn't need to dance with you. So you can see, therefore, that our problem is fixing our politics. I came finally to that conclusion. Because after leaving government, I continued to keep my voice on issues of governance. And by the time I returned home, it got louder because I would see the things that were clearly wrong choices that would not take the country to development. And I would, if everybody kept quiet, I would say, no, we can't keep quiet. We must speak up. We must speak up. And I would speak up, and they would, and the same people who knew how many times they asked me to come back to government would be the ones that say, it's because we didn't make a minister. They don't tell the country that we asked her to be minister, and she refused. No, that narrative would not help them, right? So they tell the public, it's because she's angry at us because we didn't make a minister. And people would lack critical analysis, would not say to themselves, somebody who was minister like how many, a decade plus ago, her issue is to be minister. There's something not adding up there. No, but because it's a society that is so easily persuaded by fiction. By fiction. So here we are, decades after we left government, and you look at the deterioration. In fact, deterioration. If you looked at what some of the World Bank and IMF analysis or graphs that show performance of the country, you would see a period when the performance was different. The curve just goes like this, and then suddenly, it's evidence-based. So you saw it happening. How can we do that to ourselves? Because we kept doing that to ourselves. Look at our story. We wake up one morning and the world tells us we're the world capital of extreme poverty. We don't even need the world to tell us. Our data picks up for us that of 3 to 4 million children who enter the labor market every year, only about 10% of them would find anything called decent jobs because the economy is not expanded to absorb them. We see that the global index on fragility of nations tells us that we're number 15 most fragile country in 2017. You know what it means to be the 15th most fragile country? You are in that region where destabilization can happen on the spark of just anything. It's a dangerous region to find yourself in. We look at the Human Development Index. We come out as number 142 out of 100 and maybe 60 countries, that are measured. You look at the infant mortality, child mortality, maternal mortality. Our number is high.